welcome to This Explainer. Okay, we are about to completely tear down the polished, romanticized fairy tales of history that you've been fed by Hollywood and pop culture. Get ready to leave these sparkling castles, noble knights, and benevolent gods right at the door, because the reality is far grittier, far messier, and honestly, a whole lot more fascinating than the myths. Seriously, think about it. Could you actually survive the good old days? We all love to imagine ourselves wrapped in luxurious furs in a medieval great hall, or wielding the power of glittering ancient royalty. But today, we're stripping away that cinematic gloss. I'm going to ask you to picture yourself in these brutal eras, to really put yourself in their shoes, and we'll see if you truly have what it takes to make it out alive. Okay, let's dive into this. Here's exactly what we're covering today. First, dysfunctional Greek gods. Second, reevaluating the monsters. Third, surviving the Middle Ages. Fourth, history's ruthless queens. And finally, the messy reality. Section 1. Dysfunctional Greek gods. A chaotic, petty, and deeply flawed family. So let's talk about Athena. She is widely celebrated as this divine embodiment of logic and military strategy, right? But there's a flip side. She was also petty enough to turn a super talented mortal weaver named Arachne into a literal spider. Why? Simply for winning a weaving contest. I mean, if that's the goddess of wisdom and logic, you definitely do not want to meet the goddess of petty jealousy. And then, well, we have the big boss himself. Let's look at Zeus's incredibly problematic rap sheet. He was supposedly the cosmic referee, the guy upholding laws and oaths. But in practice, actually, let's be real, he had absolute zero understanding of personal boundaries. He spent most of his time causing huge public relations nightmares for Mount Olympus by transforming into animals, swans, bulls, you name it, just to seduce mortals. He was an absolute nightmare of a husband to Hera. And let's not forget the family tradition. His father swallowed his siblings whole to prevent a coup. Truly, the ultimate cosmic HR disaster. Moving on to Section 2, Re-evaluating the monsters, power versus victims. And this brilliantly illustrates our next point. Sometimes the monster is not the one with fangs, but the one holding the sword. You know, when we actually peel back the mythology, we see that figures historically labeled as hideous beasts were often just victims, totally crushed under the immense power dynamics of petty gods and ambitious heroes. The absolute perfect example of this is Medusa. We all grew up knowing her as the terrifying snake-haired Gorgon whose gaze turns men to stone. But the tragic reality is that Medusa was originally a completely devout mortal priestess serving right in Athena's temple. She was violated by Poseidon, the sea god. And how did Athena respond to her sacred temple being defiled? She didn't punish Poseidon. Nope. Instead, she cruelly transformed Medusa, the victim, into a monster as a cautionary tale. Medusa was reshaped by pain, her story completely stolen and twisted by the very god she worshipped. All right, Section 3, Surviving the Middle Ages. Welcome to the year 1325. Okay, I want you to imagine waking up on a rotting, flea-infested straw mattress that smells exactly like the barn floor it used to be. Hollywood constantly sells us chivalrous knights, sparkling castles, and grand romance. But an actual medieval morning, it meant waking up in incredibly itchy, unwashed wool because, well, you probably only owned one tunic. It meant zero plumbing, just a chamber pot that you'd literally toss out the window into an open street sewer, hopefully yelling a warning before someone got hit. The reality was a hazardous, freezing, and fundamentally unhygienic daily endurance test. And hey, if you somehow survive the morning routine, it's time for breakfast. Prepare yourself. A whopping 60% of a peasant's daily intake was rock-hard, stale rye bread, which was often bulked up with sawdust just to make it stretch. Then 30% is a complete nutritional nightmare called pottage, a thick, gluky mystery stew that had literally been simmering in a pot for weeks on end. And to wash it all down, 10% weak ale. You drank beer at 6 a.m. not to have a good time, but because the local water supply was absolutely teeming with deadly parasites. So let's say that sawdust bread gives you a terrible stomach ache, right? And you need a doctor. Well, welcome to humorism. Medieval doctors firmly believed your health depended entirely on balancing 4 gross internal liquids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Every single illness, from a common cold to the creeping plague, was diagnosed simply as an imbalance of this bizarre internal soup. Because of this totally baffling medical theory, we get some frankly terrifying treatments. Got a fever? You obviously have way too much blood, so let's just drain your life force with some bloodletting, or maybe apply a few hungry leeches. Got a toothache? You don't go to a dentist. You go to the local barber. They might give you a haircut and then rip out your infected molar with an iron hook by candlelight, with absolutely zero anesthesia. Oh, and if all else failed, their cure for a fever was drinking more warm beer. Medicine back then was really just polite torture with a theology degree. Which leads us to this incredibly stark number, 30 to 40. That was the average life expectancy for a medieval peasant. Between the complete lack of hygiene, the grueling physical labor in the fields, and the lethal medical treatments we just talked about, making it past your 40th birthday meant you were basically considered a statistical miracle. Section 4. History's Ruthless Queens. Power, Poison, and Powder. Take, for instance, the Maya Red Queen of Palenque. Her hidden tomb was discovered deep in the Chiapas jungle back in 1994. And here's the wild part. Her skeleton was completely saturated in cinnabar, a highly toxic red powder made of mercury sulfate. The Maya used it ceremonially. Sure, it was physically lethal, but to them it symbolized blood, rebirth, and undeniable divine power. Covering her body in this toxic crimson cloud wasn't just a burial, it was a loud, eternal declaration of her supreme royal status and spiritual authority. Let's move on and see how this builds with another absolutely brilliant royal, Catherine the Great. Let's trace this out. In 1744, she arrives in Russia as this obscure German teenager named Sophie, brought in purely as a pawn for a political marriage. By 1761, her immature and disastrous husband becomes Tsar Peter III. He immediately alienates the church and the army, and Catherine realizes, okay, my life is in danger here. So what does she do? In July 1762, she expertly orchestrates a bloodless coup with the military, and by the end of that very same year, Peter is mysteriously found dead. Catherine took the throne not by birthright, but by sheer audacity and calculation. And her ambition certainly didn't stop at just surviving her husband. 200,000. Let that sink in for a second. That is the massive number of square miles Catherine the Great added to the Russian Empire during her reign. She expertly navigated a totally treacherous court full of plotting nobles, expanded the borders, embraced the Enlightenment, and built Russia into a formidable continental force. She was unapologetic in her power and completely redefined what a female monarch could achieve. Finally, Section 5, the messy reality, why this matters. So the crucial point really comes down to this, the unfiltered truth. When we romanticize history, we're actually erasing the very real, visceral struggles of the human beings who lived it. As we've seen today, marginalized figures and women wielded immense, complex power in ways the fairy tales usually just leave out. Surviving the past, whether it meant enduring the petty wrath of chaotic gods, navigating a feudal plague with literally zero antibiotics, or pulling off an imperial coup just to save your own life, required an incredible amount of defiance and endurance. That human resilience, that is the true, captivating story of history. Which leaves us with one final, provocative question to ponder today. Knowing what you know now about the terrifying diseases, the toxic cosmetics, the absolutely rootless politics, and the complete lack of basic hygiene, would you still trade your modern plumbing and antibiotics for a day in the life